And actually the title, so I'll add a fourth piece. The title of my talk is slightly different. It is Mending the Nicene Creed, a Jewish Christian Proposal. In one of the last graduate courses I took, I was required to write a statement of belief. As a Jew who believes Yeshua is the Messiah, and more specifically as a Jewish Christian, I give my allegiance to the God of Israel described in the Nicene Creed, more commonly known as the Nicene Creed. This reality is exemplified by the fact that in my office, I have, side by side, both an icon of the Nicene Council and a portrait of a rabbi wearing his talit with a menorah on the table behind him. Given my paradoxical identity as a Jewish Christian, I find the creed alone does not say everything I believe. It does not fully describe the God into whose covenant I was born into, the God who I have dedicated my life to, the God in whom we live, move, and have our being. It was here that the winds of the Spirit filled the sails in my heart that I decided the best way to outline what I believe, to describe the God into whose covenant I was born, was to amend the creed, not by taking anything away, but by making some additions. After this course project, I concluded that an ecumenical council should be called to finish the creed which was begun at Nicaea, continued in now occupied Constantinople, and hopefully one day will be finished here in Jerusalem, the center and foundation of the church. Now, some might ask, why should there be another ecumenical council? And I realized when I wrote this as a Catholic Orthodox-leaning person, that evangelicals in the audience might not care as much about that. So I hope you do, but nonetheless. Let alone, why are there two cities of Nicaea and Constantinople? Why are these not sufficient for the creed? Why add to it? What is there to finish? The answer, or at least the beginning of one, lies in the meaning of the term Catholic. For if Catholic means universal or the whole, and an ecumenical creed represents the whole of the Catholic faith, then it is questionable that there has ever been a fully ecumenical council or a fully Catholic church, or at least a Catholic church that does not fight against its own Catholicity. For the church is only fully Catholic, meaning fully universal, fully itself, when it is composed of both Jews and Gentiles, more specifically of Jews and Gentiles, fully affirmed, fully distinct, fully particular, fully alive, fully engaged, and fully active. Church councils are thus only truly and fully ecumenical when there is a foundational Jewish component of Jewish disciples of Yeshua who serve as the vital umbilical cord connecting the Gentile church to the nutrition and sustenance provided by its mother Israel, in whose womb the church dwells, in whom she lives, moves, and has her being. Which leads us to ask if Jewish disciples of Yeshua, specifically Jewish bishops, were present at the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople, and if they had a vital part in the decision-making process of the Nicene Constantinople Creed. However, for the sake of time, we can only respond that whether or not they were present, and there seems to be some disagreement on that question, it does not seem their influence was stamped upon the creed that came about because of those councils. Otherwise, the creed would not merely start at the creation of the world, only to leap over the entire story of Israel, straight to the incarnation. Considering all this, the creed is not fully ecumenical, not fully Catholic, and thus not complete. But I believe the Nicene Creed is infallible in what it says, even though it doesn't say all that it should say. Yet what it contains should not be overlooked, because what was said preserved the Jewish DNA of Christianity, even while it practiced structural supersessionism, or what Kendall Sulin calls Israel forgetfulness. Namely, summarizing the basic narrative of God's interaction with the world in a way that ignores and omits the central role played by the Jewish people. Despite this, doctrines such as the bodily resurrection, the incarnation, the Trinity, the distinction between creator and creation, the coming judgment of the dead, the testimony of Israel's scriptures, God speaking through Israel's prophets, the kingdom of God, these are all perfectly Jewish doctrines, even if not all these doctrines are recognized by all branches of Judaism. These Jewish doctrines were all maintained rather than nullified by the Creed. If the Creed had succumbed to Hellenistic philosophy, as is still popular to think in some circles, it would not be so thoroughly Jewish, so thoroughly interested in incarnation into human flesh. Recent scholarship, such as that of Benjamin D. Summer and Daniel Boyarin, has vindicated doctrines such as the Trinity and incarnation as thoroughly rooted in First and Second Temple Judaism. Yet even while the Creed maintained this Jewish DNA of Christianity, it requires, as stated by Messianic theologian Mark Kinzer, the addition of material dealing with the people of Israel, material that would provide the necessary context for the affirmations it makes about the person of Jesus, end quote. What is in the Creed is Jewish, but what was omitted was the recognition that the people of Israel are the framework and foundation in which the Christian narrative has any meaning. What was omitted was the acknowledgement that the church needs Israel's perpetual presence in order to be fully itself. Christian theology is only fully Christian within Israel's story, and Israel's story can only be maintained with the presence of flesh and blood Jews who embody that story. Now, there have been two streams within Gentile Christianity that have been in tension with one another. The stream of orthodoxy, which strove to maintain the Jewish foundation of Christianity, and a second stream, also held by the Orthodox, which desired to take that foundation for themselves by removing the people to whom it originally belonged and who in reality make up that foundation. The second stream is in tension with the first stream, for by excluding the original occupants, the original recipients of that foundation, they unwittingly exclude the foundation itself. For that foundation is itself the Jewish people. So even more than the moderate second stream within Orthodoxy that sought not to destroy the Jewish foundation, but to maintain it for itself at the expense of the Jewish people, this was counterproductive to the first stream that sought to maintain the Jewish foundation. Thus, for once again, by excluding the Jewish people, you exclude the Jewish foundation. The second stream must be done away with in order for the first stream to maintain and then fully embrace its own orthodoxy. So while we can affirm what is already in the Creed, we can and must go further by amending it, not to move away from orthodoxy, but to move more deeply into it. For you see, this second stream, which is supersessionism, is in all its forms the original progressivism. To be a supersessionist is to be a progressive. For in superseding Judaism, one is progressing from Judaism to something better and new. In this way, supersessionism is a kind of original anti-traditionalism, since it rejects to one degree or another the earlier and foundational tradition which Gentile Christians inherited. To the extent the fathers of the councils practiced supersessionism is the extent they have failed to affirm their own orthodoxy. Structural supersessionism, or Israel forgetfulness, is always, at some level, a rejection of the church's identity, since its identity is always intrinsically tied to the people of Israel, given that the church is the body of Israel's Messiah. By making amendments to the Creed, additions that remedy the Israel forgetfulness, which omitted the centrality and foundational reality of the Jewish people to God's narrative of salvation, we're affirming the church fathers' own orthodoxy more deeply than they are. By removing the second stream that desires to replace the Jewish people as the recipients of the Jewish foundation, we free the orthodox theology of these early church leaders to be more fully itself. For without this second stream, there's nothing to hold back a full embrace of the Jewish foundation, which they rightfully sought to maintain, but struggled to do so since that foundation is once again inseparably interwoven with the Jewish people whom they sought to replace. However, despite my caveats that the need for making amendments to the creed by addition is not because of a fallibility of what was said, but an omission, and is a deeper affirmation of orthodoxy rather than a move away from it, many will still be skeptical, if not downright horrified by the proposal to amend the creed. Many will say the creed cannot be amended, at least unless an ecumenical council is conveyed, as in fact it was amended at the Council of Constantinople in 381. Yeah, and this maybe is where I get in trouble. Yet, there is historical precedent for making amendments to the creeds outside of ecumenical councils. The most famous and controversial example of an amendment to the creed, and one by addition, is the Western Church's adding "and the Son" to "we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the Creator of life, who proceeds from the Father." Adding the phrase "and the Son" was done at the local Council of Toledo in the 6th century, only later to be fully accepted by the Western Church. If the councils that produced and ratified the creed were not fully ecumenical or Catholic, then in reality to add to the creed does not require an ecumenical council, so that the Western Church cannot be blamed for adding to the creed with a local council. For given that the councils which produced the Nicene Creed were limited to the churches of the Roman Empire and did not include Jews, again, I know that's up for debate, they were not fully ecumenical. Although, again, it should be clear that I am suggesting that at some point there should be such an ecumenical council, one which includes the Roman, Orthodox, Syriac, Ethiopian, Coptic, Armenian, Georgian, and Protestant churches, and of course, Jewish disciples. Another example of an amendment to the creed, albeit a less famous one, comes from the Persian church, otherwise known as the Syriac Church of the East. As Syriac scholars Baum and Winkler state regarding the Persian reception of the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople, and I quote, "Conformity with the beliefs of the Church of the Roman Empire was firmly established at the Synod of Seleucus Ctesiphon in 410. Yet, the canons and the creed were not simply assumed. The canons were adjusted to meet the needs of the Church of the East, and the creed was altered on the basis of a local Persian creed," end quote. Indeed, while the Persian creed is theologically orthodox, it differs from the version of the creed given at Nicaea and Constantinople. And it added the following line, "and in one Trinity, and in one essence, and in one will," which is certainly absent from the Nicene and Constantinople creed. As we will see with both the Western addition to the creed and that of the Persian church, accepting the theology of the creeds and canons of the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople does not preclude amending the creed. Both instances serve as precedents for amending without subverting. This also shows that even excluding a consideration of a lack of a Jewish component, the Nicene Constantinople Creed from 381 lacks full Catholicity when considering only the Gentiles. Now, if on the one hand, the Western and Persian church made amendments, while on the other hand, we recognize the theological error of Israel forgetfulness, as well as the error of anti-traditionalism rooted in supersessionism, should we thus refrain from completing the creed that was started at Nicaea and continued in Constantinople? Should we not rather finish it here in the city of Jerusalem where it all started? The city that is, will be, and has been part and parcel of God's Jewish story of creation's consummation. For this proposal of amending the creed deals with the foundation of Christian theology, and where Israel, as the foundation of Christian theology, is lacking, the Christian faith is unstable and incomplete. For as Yeshua said to the Samaritan woman, salvation is from the Jews. Indeed, if Yeshua is Jewish flesh and blood, as a member of the people of Israel, then when he states he is the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody can come to the Father except through him, then the way, the truth, and the life is itself Jewish flesh and blood, and it is only through this Jewish flesh and blood that anyone comes to the Father. A creed which omits the salvific nature of Jewish flesh and blood which does not make central God's incarnational relationship with the people and land of Israel throughout the ages, cannot be complete, but must be amended, must be added to. This is because we cannot speak about the Son of God without speaking about his incarnational affirmation of the God of Israel's covenant with Israel. For this covenant with Israel seems so central to Israel's God that in the person of Yeshua, he ratified that covenant by becoming a recipient and Jewish member of that covenant. By taking this covenant up through incarnation, by way of his flesh into the divine life, he made that covenant permanent in his own flesh by uniting it to the eternal God. This is so because the Jewish people and God's covenant with them are inseparable, since the covenant is what made them, what established their peoplehood, thereby making Israel's covenant with all its promises, including the land promise, part and parcel of Yeshua's Jewish humanity. Moreover, Isaiah tells us that God has married the people of Israel to the land of Israel. This means that Yeshua, as part of Israel, is also married to the land of Israel, so that the marriage to the land of Israel is also inseparably a part of Yeshua's full humanity. Therefore, if we discuss Yeshua while omitting consideration of God's covenant with Israel, a covenant which is part and parcel of its full humanity, then we fail to discuss the full content of the Christian faith as it relates to the second person of the Trinity. Now, this has far-ranging... And this is so, once again, precisely because this covenant and its promises with and to Israel, embodied in the Messiah's flesh, have been inseparably united to the divine life itself in the incarnation. Now, this has far-ranging implications. For instance, it means Zionism is a matter of Christological necessity, and any kind of supersessionism, including that of Christian anti-Zionism, is heresy, for it denies his full humanity. So even more so than the historical and ecclesial arguments, theologically we are moved to expand the creed, for if, as Messianic theologian Jen Rosner writes, Judaism is intrinsic to Christianity, then no doctrine of Christian theology can be understood without reference to Judaism and the Jewish people, and this must inevitably include the creed. Thank you.